coming back to where Naya left things off as far as the journey of entrepreneurship is concerned. And I think many successful businesses that have gone on to create established brands have done so when the founder has encountered a problem that they have faced themselves and then want to solve. Through the learnings of what you've been able to do with upGrad, and as you take those learnings forward, what have been the big insights or the course corrections, the mistakes that you made at upGrad that you would like to undo, redo with this one?
When I started upGrad, I said that, look, the first venture is going to focus a lot on lifelong learning. The second venture hopefully will focus on lifelong living. I've now learned the hard way that if you have to scale something in India, there's a certain level of cap that you end up getting if you're on the digital channels. I think this time the learning is don't be on the digital channels, just be physically out there, be present and attract the audience. Second, if you can get money out of corporates and enterprise, it's much better than getting money out of consumers. I mean, at least from a business perspective. So those are two differences that one would do. But there are many learnings which I've picked up while building upGrad, which definitely would be leveraged here. But the beauty is that this time it has to be done in a very different way, with fewer people, with lesser number of people. Because then today you have the technologies available which can enable you to be much more productive as what it was perhaps 10 years back.
Speaking of timing, Naya, and do you believe like you've timed it right? Because as you talked about the geopolitical shifts that are taking place, the supply chain diversification, do you believe that you've timed this idea right?
Shereen, the time is here. The time is now. It is the time for us as
When
Indian
did you start thinking about this?
I started looking at sort of cross-border opportunities about 6 months back, right? And I was always very obsessed with, like, generally speaking, appliances in particular.
Like literally while you were giving birth to your child, you were also giving birth to your next venture.
It's true, but it's true. In the hospital, I was sitting and like looking at stuff on Insta. Shereen, I grew up in a family where my parents were nomads pretty much. My father was in the merchant navy. My mom was in the government, and they would travel a lot for work. And we were a family, even in Bengal growing up, we'd have the first Braun mixer, we'd have the first microwave, we'd have the first Sony TV from Japan, and we were not a very well-to-do family. House was breaking, but we'd have the best appliances because they'd all come in from international markets. And I remember looking at them, and when it sort of outlived their longevity, then my dad and I would pull them apart. In fact, after high school, I'd applied to NID twice to do product design, and I made it to Endless to do law. So I went on in one direction, but my heart always was in product and industrial product in particular, right? So I think today, not just, this whole piece around the timing being great, but I feel like it's this strong founder market fit that I'm finally just loving. And it's also in countries.
This should have been your first venture, right?
But the time wasn't right then. The time wasn't right then. If you look at, we lived through an era where UPI and the digital rails, right, kind of powered the e-commerce wave and the quick commerce wave we see today. Now, if I'd started, and now we're seeing a cross-border rails already set up and established and, kind of gaining speed and momentum and agility. Today is a day I can build on it. If I started 10 years back, I would have failed miserably.
But, manufacturing in India is still fairly complex, and getting the right kind of talent to be able to do the design and technology. I was having a conversation with Meenu Margaret at Bliss Club, and she was talking about the difficulties and the challenges of just getting the team in place to work with technical fabrics and so on and so forth. What has that experience been like for you as you set this up?
I've had a fabulous experience building my founding team, and I'll tell you about the names later, but my co-founder in this is an industrial designer who's lived, worked and built in the US, India and China for the last 15 years of his life. He has a team of 20 industrial designers because this is what he does for a living. He actually creates consumer appliances for a living, right? And for all international markets. I have a Chinese investor. So there's a Chinese woman who's ex-Force Zone, ex-MUFG. She's currently on the East Coast. So she's kind of honing the innovation pipeline that we see from China and Taiwan and Korea.
And that doesn't worry you, given the geopolitics at this point in time, to have a Chinese investor?
And so she's not an investor. She's actually like a part of my founding team. So she's a former investor. And, so she's an investor by her training or by her profession, but she's no longer she's not actively an investor now. She's a founding team member. I have someone who's who's been amazing at building D2C in India. Very well known, and as someone who's brilliant at marketplaces. So I'm set. I have my team in place. I was telling Mayank, and Mayank has been a real partner with me in brainstorming on this journey. So I think over the last 2 months, he's like, dude, you move fast. And we move fast. But I wrote about this today as well on LinkedIn, Shereen. I think as an early stage entrepreneur, you only have two things. You have momentum and you have conviction. That's it. If you lose one of them, then you have no right to play.
But she makes it sound very easy. It's not as easy as she makes it sound. To have both momentum and conviction to pick up where Naiyya left off, Mayank, what's that been like for you through the experience of building out upGrad as well as now this new venture? And by the way, what is it called?
It's called BorderPlus. So it's a border. So my son first gave me the name Borderless. He said it should be called Borderless because you're trying to build people which can move across the border. But Borderless is taken by somebody else. So we have to settle with BorderPlus. And then I was thinking of what should be the logo. And interestingly, he again came back. Why don't you just put the map of the world with no borders? And that's your logo.
And how old is your son?
He's 10 years old.
He's 10.
He's 10 years old. I don't know how he gets to these things. In terms of timing, I personally feel that, look, as a second time, third time, whatever, fourth time founder, statistically, you're not supposed to do better than the first time founder. I think statistic wise, it's not that second time founders or third time founders will do it much better than the first time founder. But I think the failure rates are much lesser. And what happens is that you move much faster. I think we incorporated about on the 30th of October, the Choti Diwali, Diwali day. And since then, we have had our first set of revenue. We got the first set of contract. For upGrad, it took me 9 months to get my first revenue. At BorderPlus, it's been 1 month. So I think those timing, the moving fast happens much faster. But at the same time, having done this for last 10 years, it is scary as well. Because then you start thinking that you have to again roll up your sleeve. So that's why I stopped wearing anything which is full sleeves. It's always half sleeves now. No sleeve roll up right now. But no, I think this is the fun part of actually building the second time around.
I want to unpack this, the entrepreneurial lessons that you're sharing with us and go back to day zero. And, let me start by talking to you about your days at IIT Delhi and what a fabulous vintage, because, you're part of the same Dipinder, Albinder, Rohit Bansal vintage at IIT Delhi. At that point in time, what was driving you? I mean, you're a first generation entrepreneur. You don't come from a family of business or, in any way connected to business. What was that germ of an idea that made you want to take this plunge?
I never had a thought that I will ever do anything of my own in my life. Never. I think growing up, business was seen as you will have to do a little bit of shortcut, and maybe there's a bit of leakage that needs to happen for you to be successful. And there's ethically, you will have to take the wrong side. And ethics in my family was very important. And look, never thought business will come in. And I think 2008-9, Binny and Sachin started Flipkart. So early days, we'd phone them up and say, okay, can you send few books over? Because that's how it was starting up. And then the Zomato guy started as Foodie Bay.
Yes, Foodie Bay.
So wherever you will go, they will ask that, okay, can you take a picture of the menu card and send it back to me so that I can scan it up and upload it? No, when they started building something, that's the time when it hit me that, look, if these guys are doing it, there's something that one can do oneself only. But that's my linkage from what I saw at the vintage time. I think then you saw Snapdeal coming in, you saw Grofers coming in, which is now sort of Blinkit ecosystem wise. And then we started people, okay, this guy was sitting next to me and he's now building this business. So there's something that you can also do. And post that, Shereen, I've been in education. So over a period of time, saw a lot of sort of white spaces to build on. And that's where the germ of an idea for upGrad came in. But at the same time, the thought process that, look, so many have done it, I think I can also. And I was meeting, I don't know if you know Pankaj Chadda from Zomato. We were just having back and forth, and we said, what's the plan B, Mayank? I said, look, the plan A for upGrad is that it's $1 billion company. Plan B, it was a $900 million company. Because that's the time unicorn were coming into existence. So I think one of the learning that in that conversation that we realized that, look, when you're going in, then you have to go all in. You can't go with a plan B in mind that if it does not happen, I can go back to work. And I think those learnings came in not at a very serious conversation, but when you were actually just having quote unquote really time pass conversation with your friends on drinks or something else, and that's the best part of it, that even today if you want to knock on the doors, they're all available to call.
Whose door do you knock on? Who do you call at 3 a.m. like Naiyya if you're up at 3 a.m.?
No, there are many of them on the WhatsApp group that you can call. I think even this time around when I'm launching this new venture, I think Binny was one of the first persons I spoke to, and he agreed that, look, if you're doing something, I would like to be in the journey. So there are a lot of these friends who are always around.
I remember having conversations with many founders who were founding and said, look, everyone glorifies the success. Everyone glorifies the high points. Nobody really talks to you about what you go through when you hit a trough. Do you believe that entrepreneurship is inherently a lonely journey?
I mean, absolutely it is, Shereen, and it's fair because you're sort of all in some sense already living in the future. Right, as an entrepreneur, I'm like, oh, I'm already an $8 billion company. My appliances are all over the world. Like, we are publicly listed in India. Like that is the future. I'm already living
But
in my head.
you need that to keep you going, right?
Exactly, because it is also about saying that if the future looks like this, then how do I work backwards and then make my present kind of fit into the future?
So are you working with an $8 billion number?
And now I put myself in trouble clearly, Shereen, with you. But that really is the future. Like how, and as entrepreneurs, we're constantly obsessed with, and what gives us most joy is seeing our products get used in the wild at scale, right? And when that doesn't happen, or if there's a impediment in the journey, or there's a hiccup, that's a point where you have to kind of take a step back from that future or from that journey of growth and say, okay, how do I kind of reconcile this to where I mentally am today? So emotionally, it's very draining. I mean, of course, my family, my husband, Sandeep, I mean, he's just a complete rock. My mother, who's a very ambitious woman in her own way. She's on multiple boards now, and she's kind of shown that you can have ambition, you can have that, you can have an amazing family as well. But the other network I really lean on to is actually my McKinsey network. The other community, by the way, that's really become a community is actually the team community. The Tech Entrepreneurs Association, Mumbai, Mayank and I are both on the GC. And, I was telling you earlier, it feels like you're in college because you're building towards a common purpose. And it's fun to build these communities out. And in that process, you're creating your own community of founders and that founder ecosystem, right? So I think it's these communities that really keep us going because it's a shared journey that only we understand.
But we see it with investors. We see it in every walk of life, the fear of missing out. How do you deal with that? Mayank, let me start by asking you.
No, I just definitely want to touch upon this, that it is a lonely journey. I mean, you have your spouse, you have your partner, you have your co-founders, but in many cases, you end up being very lonely in certain decisions. And I think I've had that instance that, look, when you're working and you're in a stressful situation, there's not too many people that you can talk to, and it takes a toll on your body. I think I've had instances where you're just in the office and the stress takes over, and then you have to just go out.
You feel like you can't talk to somebody about that because
people will not understand. Yeah,
would
people
not
will
understand,
relate, yeah.
or is it also out of a sense of fear?
It is also, yeah. It is sometimes you don't want to be seen as very weak in front of others because everybody's trusting you that I guess you have all figured it out. And then you are like, okay, look, I don't have this figured it out. And it takes a toll on your body. And I've had instances where you are sitting in the office and then you rush to the loo, you have to throw up and then come back and you feel relieved because sometimes it is that, it just has that kind of impact physically. And I think just one feedback that I want to give to everybody, that at any point of time, there is a mental point, but there's also physical sort of toll that the body goes through. Do not let the physical aspect of the body just get away. I mean, I think people should be constantly focusing on health rather than just sort of ignoring it, saying that, look, I'm 30s, I'm 35, what's going to happen? It does take a toll.
Yeah, but this fear of missing out, Naya, and we're living in an era today where you've got IPOs happening, blockbuster listings, and everyone's focusing on the kind of wealth that's been generated and so on and so forth. How do you distance yourself? How do you find perspective when these are the headlines that are chasing you?
Shereen, I didn't have that perspective earlier, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. When I had our first baby, Arya, right, I had a call from an investor in Delhi about 2.5, 3 weeks after she was born, and I'd had a C-section. And I didn't want to tell him that I had a baby, that I had a C-section, because I didn't want him to think differently of me.
Because women are penalized
Correct,
for gender and for
correct. And I didn't want him
and so on
questioning
and so
my
forth.
commitment. So in my head, I was like, I don't want anybody questioning my commitment. And I remember, against all better judgment, hobbling to the airport, hobbling through security. In fact, the CISF officer taking my breast pump out and say, ma'am, aapko ghar jana chahiye, but doing all of that, then going to that meeting, people looking at me like I was crazy because then they figured out that I'd just gone through this like momentous journey and an operation, and then coming back home. And, I look back at that time and I was under so much FOMO from myself, just to prove myself. And that's the kind of inordinate pressure we put on ourselves as entrepreneurs. Today, of course, I'm a lot more confident, but I also know, and I'm being very open with you, Shereen. We've talked about this offline as well, that we are looked at. I mean, I am looked at differently. Like if I talk about ambition, if I talk about the fact that I'm like a pre-seed company, I'm a, on paper business plan company, they'd be like, oh, come prove yourself. It's always like a different milestone to prove myself. And despite all that I've done, my commitment, my accomplishments, who I am over the last 9 years. So I do have to go that extra mile. So with me, there's I think always going to be a little bit of FOMO. I hope it changes for the next generation.
So it hasn't gotten any better.
I mean, it has in some parts. It has, for sure, for sure. But maybe it's gotten better for me because, I already have a set of allies that I've built over time and who know me and know what I'm capable of doing and my commitment. But is it better for everybody?
So does it worry you that today, as you start Edition, where you're talking about technology and you're talking about appliances, and this is a woman-led business, that you're going to find it harder to actually be able to get funding on board?
So, the way I think about it is as follows, right? What does this business need? And then am I the right founder for it, right? It needs context to India and the US. I have that. It needs networks in India and the US. I certainly have that. It needs a consumer understanding, which I have, and a consumer insighting. Who are my customers? It's going to be a lot of women because I'm looking across home, kitchen, and beauty. I'm a woman. Hello. So what do I need? I am that person.
But it isn't enough. It's clearly not enough as the data shows us.
I mean, true, Shereen. And I think that's what we need to, I think that also is that piece that drives all of us to prove the data wrong in time, right? To change that data. So in some sense, when I look at my journey, it's a journey of two things. One is about Indian entrepreneurs proving to the world that they can build global world-class brands from India, not just an India story. It's actually a global story. And the second is that women can build large technology businesses. And I want to make that happen. And that's two things that keeps me awake at night.
You don't mind talking about this sort of taking brand India global, aspiring to build a world-class company in India for a global market. What do you see as the big challenges there?
I want to touch one thing about FOMO that you asked, Shereen, that sometimes the FOMO of, there's a lot more that you can do, but there's also FOMO of missing out on what you're going through in your, perhaps one of the best years with your family. I mean, sometimes you do have to sacrifice that. So I think I had a massive FOMO, and I think all my friends said, taking a break, taking a 1 year backpacking around the world. I said, no, right now I just want to spend my time with my son and then sort of do that. But there's a lot of FOMO sometimes that you feel that because of you're building something, you're missing out on a very important part of your life experience. And that's something that goes at the back of my mind. For me, I must say that without my wife, I don't think I would have done the last 10 years so far. But even now going forward, it's been very clearly time allocated, that this time is sacrosanct and you need to spend time. I guess that's a luxury of being perhaps starting something second time. But to your other point I realized one very interesting, the Indian brands going abroad, right? One big shift that at least I've seen between India and European culture is in India, we say, ho jayega. It will happen. And then we work backwards to make it happen. And when you're landing up and talking to a European guy and he's like, look, have you tested it 5 times, 10 times? I will jump from the plane and then I will stretch my own parachute and land. But those guys will test the parachute 10 times, 15 times before they land up there. And therefore, that actually boils down to what you define as quality. Because in India, sometimes quality is taken as, if it's functioning, it's okay. But it has to be the last mile which matters a lot. So I think when you're building for the world, the shift that happens is that it's not just problem solving, but it's the last mile that matters.
Talking about what Mayank was alluding to, this FOMO about how much you invest in work and how much you invest in life. But how do you look at prioritization or integration or whatever you would like to call it? And especially as a woman, because, through all the conversations that I've had with women, including somebody like Indra Nooyi, who's been there, done that. And she said, if I could wear a t-shirt that said I'm guilty all the time, I mean, that is what I would wear because that's the burden that you bear. What has it been like for you and how do you deal with it?
I honestly don't feel guilty, Shereen. I don't know. Maybe I should, but I don't.
No, you shouldn't.
I know. And I think the reason for that is because I've had my mother as my role model, my sister. I mean, they're both very successful professionally. They built amazing careers. In fact, if I don't build an amazing career, I'd feel guilty. And we all stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, my nani was a first generation entrepreneur who started a school because she went to apply. My nana was a retired army colonel, didn't have much money to marry his 3 girls off at that point in time in Amritsar. And she went to find a job in a local school and they rejected her saying, you're not good enough. She said, well, guess what? I'm going to start my own school. And she built an amazing school out, which is one of the most popular schools at that point in time in Amritsar, right? So we stand on the shoulders of giants, people who've put in their all into our ambitions, and that's why we can dare to dream. So I think my guilt would actually come from not meeting what they have already laid out so beautifully for us.